your income and they allow you to keep that percentage that they want you to keep under their conditions. So even a very small income tax is very bad because it leads to the monstrosity that we have today. That's why in a free society, in a true republic, a limited government, we would not have an income tax and we would have to repeal the 16th Amendment. Certainly in that same period of time, we had the introduction of that little group of people in Washington that designs our monetary policy. The Federal Reserve System came in 1913. You know, I took a couple of days off for campaigning. I went back to D.C. You know, I went to visit with my friend Ben Bernanke. And I tried to explain to him that the Federal Reserve hasn't been doing a very good job. They've been in business for 99 years, and they've lost 98% of the value of the currency of the dollar that they got in 1913. So I'm bound and determined that next year on the 100th anniversary, we should celebrate by repealing the Federal Reserve Act. But at that same time, our history, especially with Woodrow Wilson, the idealism of Wilson was that our policy would become making the world safe for democracy. We should aggressively use our force to go around the world in promoting what we believe in. Now, defending our country is one thing, but aggressively trying to spread what they call American exceptionalism makes no sense. The American people in our country has had a lot of exceptional ideas, and we've had good prosperity, and we are very exceptional in many ways. This notion that we are so exceptional that we can use force to go into other countries, occupy these countries, and tell other people how they must live makes no sense whatsoever. That cancels out all our exceptionalism. Exceptional nation or exceptional town or exceptional person sets a good standard, then other people would look to us. They would look to our country, and if we are free and prosperous, have sound money, peaceful foreign policy, maybe other countries would say, you know, America is exceptional. Then they would want to emulate us and not think that we have to do that by force. And I think that's what has happened, especially in these last 10 or 15 years. It's been a bad trend. This whole notion came up with the last administration and pursued by this administration of preemptive war. You know, if they would say what that really is, you know, we live in a time where they use language in a negative fashion. But preemptive war is aggression, is what it is. And we don't have a right to invade another country that has not attacked us, no matter what kind of government. Going on a lot in the last 10, 11 years. We've been in Afghanistan now more than 10 years. We still are very much in Iraq. And the consequences have not been good. They've been so negative. The number of Americans that have died in these last 10 years, if you count all the military and contractors, it's approaching 9,000. But that's only part of it. When you think about the 44,000 have come back severely injured, people seem to forget about them. They come back, just think of how many came back that are amputees. And think of the hundreds of thousands now begging and pleading for help at the veterans offices for post-traumatic stress syndrome and brain injury. We need to take care of our veterans. Is going to continue, and the additional cost, of course, is the financial cost. War is always a negative for the economy. People who still believe that you get out of recessions and depressions by war, it's nonsense. The country is always poorer. They say, well, we put more people to work, but putting people to work building a bomb or an airplane, you send it over and you blow it out. There's no added benefits to our society. Standard of living doesn't go up. But what they don't think about it, if we wouldn't spend these hundreds of billions of dollars overseas and that money would be spent back here. Maybe we would be competitive in the manufacturing business once again. Tremendous blowback from our foreign policy, not only from the 9/11, and I don't know if you saw it just yesterday, the day before, a report came out. The two individuals that were on the 9/11 Commission, Bob Kerry and Bob Graham, are now saying, well, you know, they're reporting now that Saudi Arabia might have been involved in 9/11. And I said, now they're saying it. Why didn't they say it when they were on the 9/11 Commission and tell the American people the truth? But you know, I always wondered, the truth is, we don't know the truth about 9/11, exactly what happened. I've never felt confident government commissions and investigations do all that much other than cover up the people who made the mistakes. But what they're saying now is that maybe the government was literally involved. 15 out of the 19 came from Saudi Arabia. The thing that bothered me most back at that time was there were a lot of people from Saudi Arabia in this country, even with the last name of bin Laden. And guess what? They got on their private jets. They flew out of this country before I was allowed to get on an airplane and try to get out of D.C. and come back to Texas. There's something wrong with that. You know, one thing that is said, a lot of mistakes have been made, and I refer a lot of times to what McNamara said before he died. He wrote a book and halfway apologizing about the war he pursued in Vietnam and how disastrous that was. And a reporter asked him, well, do you think you ought to apologize? He says, what's good's an apology? He says, the only thing that counts is if you've made mistakes is to change the policy. And that's what we need to do. When we mess up, we need to, apologies maybe are worthwhile sometimes, but what we need to do is recognize mistakes and change it. If a foreign policy is flawed, we have to change the foreign policy. We have literally driven so many in the Middle East into the arms of the Iranians. Here we are about ready to go to war against the Iranians, but we're driving them into the arms of the Iranians. The Iraqis are closer. They're all Shiites now. The Shiites are in charge of Iraq. And, you know, Saddam Hussein, as bad as he was, at least he didn't get along with the Ayatollah, and there was a balance of power there. So, in Pakistan now, we've been, you know, we have this schizophrenic attitude with Pakistan. We give them billions of dollars at the same time we send drone missiles over there and killing innocent people. And they get a little upset with us. But guess what? We're telling them what to do, and they have to do this, and they're getting tired of it. You know what they want to do is they want to get a closer alignment with the Iranians. The Iranians want a closer alignment with the Chinese. So all this, at the same time, we live beyond our means, we spend excessively, we buy cheap goods from the Chinese. They now have about $1.5 trillion. They're buying them less frequently now, but guess what? They're investing in them. They're not investing in war, they're investing in buying oil wells and natural resources in countries where we're occupied, like Afghanistan. They're literally going in there, and even in Iraq and Iran. And they're acting too much like capitalists to me, as far as I'm concerned. But I think we're so foolish. I think the foreign policy has to be changed. And that's where the $1 trillion that I want to cut, I'd start with overseas spending. All the troops should be brought home. They should be brought home from Germany. And there are programs, certainly we need to take care of the veterans, but there are programs that we should try to salvage. They're bankrupt right now. Medicare and Social Security, they're bankrupt. And at the rate we're going, at the rate we're spending, the dollar will collapse and the money won't work and everybody's going to be really hurt. So my idea is cutting this $1 trillion, and you have to cut something domestically and overseas. But you've got to have priorities. And for me, it are the people that have become dependent on the federal government, which they should have never in the first place, but they are, and we shouldn't start with cutting that. And that is child health care, and medical care for the elderly, and Social Security. And we can do this with cutting. If we want to cut, we might be able to save Social Security. If we won't cut, I think we're in a lot more trouble than anybody really wants. So that is the main reason why I want to emphasize how necessary it is to cut the spending. But one of the other things about what we're facing today is the undermining of our personal liberties. Whether it's the war overseas, wars are going on, and we look back in our history, whether it was the Civil War, World War I, or World War II, look at what we did to the Japanese Americans and put them in concentration camps. And most of the time we back off from that. But now we're in a war, it's been declared, it's preemptive war, and it's worldwide. It's against a force called terrorism. Terrorism, people who commit crimes. And so many people who we're trying to kill right now are called Taliban. And Taliban were our allies when the Soviets were in Afghanistan. And their people, they're not part of the Al-Qaeda. They're not planning to come here. Al-Qaeda gets so angry they do want to come here. But the Taliban are individuals, despite their religious beliefs and everything else. To me, that's not our business. But the Taliban really motivates people by saying, let's throw all the foreigners out, whether they're the Russians or the Americans, and we ought to try to understand it from their viewpoint as well.
That's right.
But under these circumstances, whether it's that kind of war, or whether it's a war on drugs, that introduces the notion that government, police and FBI and SWAT teams have now licensed to come into our house without proper search warrants.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons we fought a revolution, is to keep the King's Army from busting into the houses of the consequence, of course, of 9/11 and passing a bill that they had tried to pass for a long time, but they got it passed right after 9/11, and that was the Patriot Act that should have never been passed. The Patriot Act would have never been passed if they called it Repeal the Fourth Amendment Act. Maybe they would have voted against it. So when we get ready to repeal it, we're not going to say it's the repeal of the Patriot Act, because people like to be patriotic. I think it's an unpatriotic act. But what we should call the bill is Restore the Fourth Amendment Act. This attitude that allows, the type of treatment that we all get at airports. We don't need the TSA pretending they're making us safer. We're not safer because